Hey guys, real quick before the video starts, I just want to explain this video is kind of like a George Lucas version of my previous history of unmade Godzilla movies, which I made, oh god, years ago. So that's what this video is. It's basically just a more coherent, slightly differently edited version of those videos all in one go. So I just wanted to explain what this video was before you guys watched it. So that'll explain why some of the editing is a little different, why some of the narration is like I sound different in like certain clips than I do in other ones, because it's a bunch of different videos all put together. Alright, with that being said, enjoy the video.
Keep in mind, in order for a project to even be worth mentioning on here, it needs to have some substantial information behind it. Don't call a movie a cancelled project just because a director or producer farted, heard the sound, and thought, wow, that'd make a great movie. And I'm focusing more on the lost movie projects and not specific monster ideas. So stuff like Neo Godzilla, which was just an early concept for Space Godzilla, won't be in here. Oh, and Godzilla vs. the Devil, aka Godzilla vs. Satan, was never even a real thing. The website TohoKingdom.com accidentally posted about it on their site many years back in the early days of the internet, and due to that, it gained infamy as a lost movie. Seriously, look it up. Godzilla vs. the Devil was never once a real project that Toho had ever conceived. In fact, the whole rumor came about because someone misread an early draft of the cancelled 80s movie Return of Godzilla that was supposed to feature Bagan. The code name for that movie's script? Godzilla vs. the Devil. Okay, this one, in 1956, as a sequel to Godzilla Raids Again, Toho came up with the idea for a movie dubbed Bride of Godzilla. In this movie, a mad scientist named Dr. Shida builds a robot wife to replace his dead wife. But when Godzilla and Anguirus show up again, he decides to build a giant robotic version of his daughter called a Robot Daughter, because she had no official name, to fight them both. Oh, it gets weirder. Dr. Shida finds a giant cavern full of multiple Anguiruses, multiple Godzillas, a bunch of mermaids, a giant chameleon, and an Archaeopteryx. It gets weirder! Robot Daughter ends up defeating both the chameleon and the Archaeopteryx, I don't give a shit if I'm pronouncing that wrong, busts the fuck out of Anguirus' jaw, and then proceeds to get naked and go into a cave with Godzilla, who at this point has fallen in love with the robot. But turns out she's just a goddamn walking hydrogen bomb and literally cockblocks Godzilla by blowing up, presumably killing Godzilla. What the actual ass? I can't imagine why this was cancelled, other than, you know, the fact that this would make the weird shit in Godzilla vs. Hedorah look tame in comparison. Our journey begins in 1957, shortly after the original Godzilla made its way to America in 1956 in the form of the Americanized Godzilla King of the Monsters with Raymond Burr footage added in. Producers Harry Ribnick, Edward Barrison, and Richard Kay with their production company AB-PT Pictures had acquired the rights to distribute Godzilla Raids Again. However, the pair couldn't give two shits about that movie and planned to make an entirely different movie called The Volcano Monsters that would use not only footage from Raids Again, but also new footage shot with a Godzilla and Anguirus suit that Toho provided them. The idea was to have two dinosaurs rampaging through San Francisco with the suits standing in for the dinosaurs, obviously. Also, all footage of Godzilla using his breath was to be removed as well. Now think about it this way, back then, Godzilla was not as beloved as he is today. Toho was already having trouble marketing their movies in America, so they were totally game for the idea. Somewhere along the line during production, AB-PT Pictures closed its doors, thus bringing an end to the production of the Volcano Monsters. The suits were never returned to Toho either. This is the only known photo of them. Later, Warner Brothers would get the rights to Godzilla Raids Again, and well, we know how that went. Seriously, Godzilla is awesome. Why were all these companies trying to release Godzilla movies that weren't called Godzilla? They wanted the money and all the work that Toho put in, but didn't want the name. King Kong vs. Godzilla is one of the most successful and profitable Godzilla movies in its entire history. So it stands to reason that Toho would have wanted to capitalize on this right away. Shinichi Sekizawa, the writer of the original King Kong vs. Godzilla, wrote a draft for the continuation, literally called Continuation King Kong vs. Godzilla, but unfortunately it never made it past the concept stage. But luckily, Godzilla vs. Kong is coming in 2020, so the series is gonna live on. During the early 60s, Toho really wanted to create a Frankenstein movie. Their first attempt was another lost film called Frankenstein vs. the Human Vapor. After that was scrapped, Godzilla vs. Frankenstein was decided to be the next project. It was originally being written by Shinichi Sekizawa, but he would later be reassigned once Toho acquired the rights to yet another unmade monster movie called King Kong vs. Frankenstein. All this might be hard to follow, but suffice to say, shit didn't happen. Toho did finally get their Frankenstein movie made in 1965, Frankenstein vs. Baragon. Now we move on to one of the more fucked concepts, which honestly, I would have loved to have seen. Shinichi Sekizawa, this guy was a fucking genius, I swear to God, came up with the idea of having, no joke, Godzilla face off against the Dark Knight himself, Batman. The film would have also included Robin, Commissioner Gordon, hell, even Batgirl was mentioned. How did this not get made? What the hell? It's safe to say that Godzilla vs. Hedorah, or Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster as it was known in America, is one of the fucking weirdest, most batshit insane Godzilla movies ever made. Fish heads, Godzilla flying, shit was crazy. The director, Yoshimitsu Banno, was so confident that his film would be successful that he immediately began working on its sequel. The first concept would have featured Godzilla fighting some kind of monster starfish. No design or name for this thing was ever revealed. Most fans just know it as Hitoda. It then became a straight-up sequel, featuring another Hedorah appearing in Africa. However, Tomoyuki Tanaka, producer of all Toho movies, Godzilla included, from his creation in 1954 up to 1995's Godzilla vs. Destroyer, who had been hospitalized while Godzilla vs. Hedorah was being made, finally got to see the movie, and he hated it so much that he barred Banno from ever making another Toho film again, Godzilla or otherwise. In 1972, Tsuburaya Productions celebrated their 10th anniversary. As part of this, they approached Toho about creating a new Godzilla film. The reason for this was because the creator of Godzilla's suit was Eiji Tsuburaya, special effects guru who'd go on to found Tsuburaya Productions in the 60s. Toho gave the green light and loaned Tsuburaya Productions the suit from Son of Godzilla. The plot involved a monster coming to Earth from the moon's surface dubbed Red Moon. At the same time of Red Moon's appearance, another monster appears on Earth called Erebus. The appearance of the two monsters leads the Japanese Defense Force to try and bring the monsters together to kill each other. That sounds familiar. However, when the monsters meet, they don't kill each other, they get their freak on instead and give birth to a third monster called Hefun. Sounds familiar! Godzilla shows up, kills both Red Moon and Erebus, and saves the day. Seriously, the movie never came to be and was later re-edited heavily into fucking Daigoro vs. Goliath. I already reviewed that steaming pile and I don't ever want to talk about it again. There was a long road of ideas leading up to what would eventually become Godzilla vs. Gigan and Godzilla vs. Megalon, and it begins here. Originally called Godzilla vs. the Space Monsters Earth Defense Directive, which just rolls off the fucking tongue, it would have called for the appearances of 6 monsters, including Godzilla, Anguirus, King Ghidorah, Megalon, and Gigan, who at the time had not been created yet, as well as a final kaiju that was never made, known as Maijin Tool. Maijin Tool was described as a sword-wielding god that arose from a mountain because he was pissed off. That sounds awesome. When Earth Defense Directive didn't get made, fuck saying that whole title. The idea shifted into the return of King Ghidorah. The plot was very similar to what it ended up actually becoming, Godzilla vs. Gigan, but would have been a far bigger version of that movie. It was originally conceived as featuring Godzilla, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Gigan, Varan, and another kaiju that we never got called Mogu. At some point, the budget started getting out of hand, so Mogu was dropped entirely, and both Rodan and Varan were replaced by Anguirus. As the movie went along, its name was changed many times from Earth Destruction Directive Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah to Earth Destruction Directive Godzilla vs. Gigan to eventually just Godzilla vs. Gigan. In 1974, the Godzilla franchise turned 20 years old. In an effort to celebrate the anniversary, Toho began work on the brilliantly titled Giant Monsters Converge on Okinawa, Showdown in Zanpamisaki. Seriously, what the hell is with Japanese and their love for ridiculously long titles? It would have revolved around an alien race called the Garuda, attacking Earth with their own monster dubbed Garugan. Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus rise up to fight back, culminating in a battle in Okinawa, as if you couldn't figure that out from the movie's ridiculously awesome title. Somewhere along the line of production, Garugan was dropped and replaced with 2 new monsters, King Barugan, and Mecha Godzilla, who at this point had never been seen yet. The Garuga aliens were replaced by the black hole aliens. You know, those weird-ass monkey dudes from Terror of Mecha Godzilla and Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla. King Barugan was another kaiju we never saw, but it was described as a red and brown colored monster with prism-reflected eyes and horns. No picture of it exists, but in the end, his horns were removed, his color was changed, and he would end up becoming King Caesar. And since it isn't worth mentioning for its own segment, I should also add that the original draft for Terror of Mecha Godzilla was supposed to feature two monsters called Titans, which were essentially Titanosaurus, but walking on four legs. In 1978, Henry Gene Saperstein, one of the heads at UPA Pictures, known for his involvement in Frankenstein vs. Baragon and War of the Gargantuas, expressed interest in pitting the Gargantua monster against Godzilla. It had a budget of $6 million and was said to have featured more than one Gargantua monster, though the true number is unknown. While Godzilla vs. Gargantua never made it past the planning stage, we know it existed. In Toho's annual lineup for 1978, a film was listed as US-Japan collaboration Godzilla. Also in 1978, writer Ryuzo Nakanishi, who wrote Toho's The War in Space from 1977, proposed a remake of the original 1954 film. Entitled King of the Monsters: Rebirth of Godzilla, the plot very closely followed the original film's story. Why this one never came to pass is strange. Not only was Tomoyuki Tanaka interested, but he was so interested in fact that he commissioned a second draft. A second writer, Akira Murao, was brought in, and even Jun Fukuda, director of many Godzilla films including Son of Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Megalon, and Godzilla vs. Gigan, you know, all the shitty ones, was attached to direct. It's not really known why the movie was cancelled. Brace yourselves. This shit's crazy. If this had actually been how Toho ended the Showa series, holy shit. So, you know how you always see memes and shit about how fat Godzilla's thighs are, or how the 2014 American version of him was just a fat ass altogether? Well, apparently, all that sugary radiation catches up with Godzilla, because in 1979's cancelled project, A Space Godzilla, no relation to the actual Space Godzilla, Godzilla is dying of diabetes. Yes, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, almost had diabetes. And yes, that is a picture of Godzilla with his guts hanging out. Scarred yet? Not only that, but this Godzilla was a female, and was going to be an intelligent alien life form named Roseanne that came from the Godzilla planet. Oh, and she's pregnant. So, Roseanne is turned into a spaceship. Yes, turned into a spaceship, not put on a spaceship, where she is sent back to her planet where her husband Kunin awaits. Once on its home planet again, the planet is attacked by a race of half-human, half-alien motherfuckers called Cenarians, and their leader, Gamoni, a lizard alien with tits. How in the unholy fuck a concept that insane didn't get made is completely beyond me. They even got so far as to make a puppet for the movie. The screenplay was written by Sakio Hirata, and if you're wondering where all this crazy art came from, it's from a short story version of the movie story that was published in the Japanese version of a magazine called Starlog. The art for the story was actually done by Katsuhiro Otomo, the creator of Akira. Could you imagine if this movie had been allowed to actually happen? That's fucking crazy, dude. It'd definitely be among the black sheep of the franchise, if not the most black sheep entry in the series. In 1979, the brilliant Shinichi Sekizawa, the guy who wanted to make a Godzilla vs. Batman movie, came up with the idea for Godzilla vs. the Osaka Fortress. Seriously, this guy was a genius. Now, with a title like the Osaka Fortress, I expected to see Godzilla fight a building, which is equal parts dumb as fuck and something I'd love to see. That's not actually the case, however. In reality, the plot would have focused on a revolt within the government and Godzilla doing battle with a human-piloted robot. Now, whether or not this robot was a good guy or Godzilla was supposed to be the hero and fight a rogue group of the government, we don't know. It does sound a lot like Pacific Rim, though, to be honest. With Terror of Mechagodzilla bringing the Showa era of Godzilla to a close, Toho wanted to bring the Big G back in a big way. There hadn't been a Godzilla movie in 5 years, and at this point Godzilla was a very well-known name overseas. Everyone knew the name Godzilla. For Godzilla's revival, Tomoyuki Tanaka really wanted the film to cater to an adult crowd, after the obvious child-friendly films that were made during the Showa period. The first concept for the revival, and what would eventually become the return of Godzilla, began as the resurrection of Godzilla. Godzilla would have faced off against a brand new, fucking awesome-sounding monster called Bagan. Bagan was a shape-shifting beast that would shift between 3 different forms: a dragon god, a monkey god, and a water god. At the end of the film, all three forms would have combined together for the final showdown with Godzilla. There is some artwork and concepts of this version of Bagan, but ultimately it wouldn't come to pass. However, for some odd-ass reason, another version of Bagan does appear in Super Godzilla, so there's that. After Godzilla defeats Bagan, he would go on to trash Tokyo as if to say, "I won now, you're all my bitches." In an effort to defeat Godzilla, scientists bait Godzilla into an abandoned atoll and hit him with something called Ryconium. It's a nuclear fission device and blows the shit out of Godzilla. He's presumed dead, but washes up on the shores of the United States and lets out one final roar. Are you fucking kidding me? That would have been absolutely incredible. I love Godzilla 1985, but holy shit, this would have blown that out of the water. They ended up canceling the film primarily because it called for way too much of a budget than Toho was willing to risk. But come on, Toho, remake this, please. Last year, after over 30 movies in the damn franchise, we were finally graced with an animated Godzilla movie in the form of Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. But did you know this wasn't the first time an animated Godzilla movie had been in the works? In 1988, good old Henry G. Saperstein, who I talked about quite a bit in the last 4 parts of the series, was at one point in the process of producing an animated Godzilla movie around the same time that Godzilla vs. Biollante was being written. There isn't a whole hell of a lot known about this movie other than Saperstein was planning to do all pre- and post-production work for it in the US, while all the animation was going to be done in Japan. So technically, it would have been a US-made anime movie, and technically it would have been the first American Godzilla movie. Man, history could have been so much more different. The return of Godzilla, aka Godzilla 1985, revived the King of the Monsters in a big way, but didn't see a sequel until Godzilla vs. Biollante in 1989. But the road getting there was a bit of a strange one. The first sequel idea came from a writing contest of all things that Toho held in 1986. The runner-up of the contest was an American named Jim Bannon, who turned in a concept called Godzilla 2. Just Godzilla 2, where Godzilla would face off against what was essentially Skynet from Terminator. An advanced artificial intelligence system does battle with Godzilla by building its own mechanized army to fight him. But somewhere along the line, Godzilla was removed entirely from the script and it was heavily reworked into a film that actually did get made. The 1989 film Gunhead. I'm sure everybody remembers that one. So hey, while you didn't end up getting a Godzilla film, you did get writing credit for Gunhead. So there you go, Jim. Yay. Now the winner of the contest, Shinichiro Kobayashi, his script ended up being a little movie called Godzilla vs. Biollante. Speaking of which, the original title was Godzilla 2, Godzilla vs. Biollante, and featured a scene where Godzilla fights a rat-looking giant fish called Dotalios, some shit like that. Kills it and eats it. That would have been the first time we've ever seen Godzilla eat anything, if I'm not mistaken. The original King Kong vs. Godzilla from 1962 is one of, if not the most profitable Godzilla film ever made if adjusted for inflation. So when Godzilla vs. Biollante did a really piss-poor job at the box office, it makes sense that Toho would want to redo this concept again, and capitalize on that kaiju cash. This film would have had its title rearranged to be called Godzilla vs. King Kong, and would have pitted the two monsters against each other once again, with King Kong falling in love with a scientist who would later turn him into a cyborg. However, Turner Entertainment, who held the rights to King Kong at the time, were like, sure, just give us all the money. Toho didn't have all the money, and instead decided to shift the project to Godzilla vs. Mechanic Kong, from King Kong Escapes. But again, Turner Entertainment demanded all the money, claiming that Mechanic Kong looked similar enough to the original Kong. So, Toho later repurposed the concepts into both Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Originally proposed as a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Biollante, Toho decided to bring Mothra back to the big screen and pit her against Bagan, the monster originally intended to fight Godzilla in the Resurrection of Godzilla from the 80s. Mothra vs. Bagan would have pitted Mothra against the version of Bagan seen in Super Godzilla, not the version featuring multiple forms that was conceived for the Godzilla film. Its name was also changed to Bacon, or Bakin, which I'm sure is pronounced Bacon. Mothra vs. Bacon sounds awesome. Toho's original intentions were for Mothra vs. Bagan to kick off a tetralogy of films, 4 in total, that would have focused on kaiju outside of Godzilla. Think of it as an old school cinematic universe similar to what we have now with the MonsterVerse. Ultimately, because of Godzilla vs. Biollante's poor performance at the box office, Toho canceled the movie. They just couldn't warrant putting so much financial risk on a monster that wasn't Godzilla. Plot elements from the film would eventually make their way into Rebirth of Mothra. Now the reason I'm mentioning Mothra vs. Bagan is because in 1991, a direct sequel to Mothra vs. Bagan was being planned as well. This film, known as just Godzilla 3, would see the return of Godzilla after waking up from his battle with Bioland. Not only that, but it would have acted as sort of an origin story to Bagan himself. Toho obviously put a lot of thought and work into Bagan. It's really a shame and a waste that to this day we still haven't seen him. The new Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah that was released in 1991 was far more successful than Godzilla vs. Bioland, which urged Toho to play it safe and immediately begin work on a direct sequel. The return of King Ghidorah would have pitted Godzilla against a second Ghidorah with an origin closer to how he arrived in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster from 1964. Very little is known about the film as it never made it past the planning stage and was dumped in favor of Godzilla vs. Mothra. Speaking of Godzilla vs. Mothra, before Godzilla would face off with Mothra and Batra, the original kaiju set to face off with the Big G was known as Gigamoth. Written by special effects director Koichi Kawakita and Minoru Yoshida, Godzilla vs. Gigamoth's original script wasn't very well liked by Toho and was originally cancelled. That was until Toho decided they really had a boner for pitting Godzilla and Mothra against each other again, which at this point had not happened since the good old days. Eventually, Gigamoth was shifted into what would become Batra, and Godzilla vs. Gigamoth became Godzilla vs. Mothra Battle for Earth. The plot of the original Gigamoth concept wasn't too far different from what we ended up getting, though. So with Godzilla vs. Mothra now the set project, now came the concept for that movie. Originally, Koichi Kawakita had the idea of Godzilla completely killing Mothra off at the end of the film. The reasoning? Because he wanted a sequel which was to be known as Godzilla vs. Mecha Mothra. How badass is that? I mean, just saying that out loud sounds right. Mecha Mothra. Mecha Mothra. However, they decided ultimately to kill Batra in her place and allow her to live. Also in 1993, anime designer Yutaka Tsubuchi came to Toho with a 14-page draft script for an idea called Godzilla vs. Berserk. This was the very early beginnings of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, which isn't surprising if you look at this guy's career. He had a serious fetish for mecha. Berserk was a metallic alien substance that lands on Earth when an asteroid crashes into us. It would eat various metals throughout the film, which would cause it to grow and change shape. Its ultimate goal, to mimic the planet's dominant life form, in this case, Godzilla. But as with all cool-sounding concepts, it was scrapped and became, well, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, which is a little confusing because I know they're talking about Mechagodzilla version 2, but technically it's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 3 if you count Terror of Mechagodzilla because of the sequel, whatever. Anyway, I should also mention that in the early stages of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, Mechagodzilla looked a lot closer to what he looked like in the 70s and had the ability to break into two different machines, which would have been awesome. In 1994, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla would hit theaters, but long before this, the original concept for the film was very different. Originally, the film was called Godzilla vs. Astro Godzilla, which, let's face it, sounds a hell of a lot cooler than Space Godzilla. This monster would have been born as a result of Biolant DNA in space, but would have been a completely albino version of Godzilla. In other words, he would have been white. Rather than the crystal form seen with Space Godzilla, Astro Godzilla had more of an ice thing going for him. Not only that, but Mothra was set to return as well. Maybe baby Godzilla wouldn't have gotten his ass kicked so much in the final movie if Mothra had actually shown up. Okay, this one is one of the coolest concepts in the entire history, and I'm so pissed this didn't happen. Seriously, listen to this shit and tell me it doesn't sound incredible. The restless, pissed-off spirit of the original Godzilla killed in 1954 comes ashore and possesses the body of little Godzilla, forcing his body to grow and mutate at a heightened speed. As a result, the modern Godzilla has to fight the old Godzilla, and it would have thrown Anguirus in for good measure. Where the hell's this movie? Godzilla vs. Ghost Godzilla was cancelled because, at the time, I guess having Godzilla face a mechanical version, a space version, and a ghost version of himself back to back to back would have been too much. But honestly, I would have given up one of those last two movies for this one. Damn. The same year, after Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla was scrapped, Toho once again tried to bring another Bagan movie into the mix. Godzilla vs. Bagan was like the umpteenth time Toho had tried to make a film with Bagan, but, you know, once it failed again, Bagan just has no luck, man. It was also supposed to feature the Gotengo from the 1963 film Atragon. A lot of you probably recognize it as the ship in Godzilla Final Wars. It was shortly after these failed concepts that Godzilla vs. Destroyer would be released and Godzilla would disappear from the screen for 5 long years. Godzilla vs. Destroyer is one of the greatest Godzilla movies in the franchise, and it ended the Heisei series, but Toho originally had other plans for retiring the King of the Monsters. Remember Varan, That flying squirrel-looking bastard from 1958's Varan the Unbelievable and like 2 seconds of Destroy All Monsters? Well, he was originally supposed to be Heisei Godzilla's final opponent, except this Varan would have been one badass motherfucker. The movie's story would have taken place in 1999 with Godzilla and Little Godzilla teaming up to take him on, and would eventually come out victorious. Plus, Godzilla didn't die at the end of this one. But the concepts for this movie would ultimately shift over to Godzilla vs. Bagan, yet another one of the awesome concepts that Toho saw fit to just cock-tease us with. Godzilla vs. Bagagiris originally began its conception as Godzilla vs. Ghost Godzilla, an amazing cancelled project that I covered in part 3. The idea was still similar, with Godzilla doing battle with the ghost of the original Godzilla from 1954, except instead of taking over the body of Little Godzilla, this time it was Anguirus that was possessed. Picture that, Godzilla inside Anguirus fighting Godzilla. What the fuck? But the final draft for this idea would have also featured Baragon, who would end up fusing with the Godzilla-possessed Anguirus, and thus becoming the titular character Baragiris. What an original name. There isn't much that exists of this movie's existence, other than some concept art for what Anguirus' Heisei design would have looked like, plus a new species of Anguirus that was supposed to appear in the movie dubbed Anguirus Hound. Godzilla vs. Baru Baroi was one of the original concepts that eventually became Godzilla vs. Destroyer, even sharing many of its ideas, including the fact that this monster was also an organism found in Tokyo Bay and would have tied into the original 1954 film, but other than that, there isn't a whole hell of a lot known about its actual plot. Apparently, it would have moved around the globe, consuming everything in its path, eventually even consuming the Heisei Anguirus design from the Ghost Godzilla concept. Luckily, while there isn't a script or anything, there is a ton of concept art. This thing is fucking weird looking, and it kind of reminds me of that one scene from the Parasite anime. You know, that weird wide-mouth looking dude that eats that chick's head. Honestly, I think just based on this art alone, this thing would have looked awesome on screen. Especially the version it turns into after eating Anguirus. Believe it or not, Hollywood's been trying to make an American-made Godzilla movie all the way back since 1983. When I say American-made, I don't mean Americanized, like Godzilla King of the Monsters or Godzilla 1985. I mean a full-blown Hollywood-made Godzilla movie. Steve Miner, director of Friday the 13th Part 2, Part 3, Halloween H2O, and Lake Placid, among some other god-awful shit, had come to Toho with the idea of making a Godzilla movie. The film was to be called Godzilla King of the Monsters 3D. With Toho's approval, Steve went about hiring screenwriter Fred Decker, along with William Stout, as concept artist for the film. William has a serious talent for dinosaur artwork, which would come into play with this version of Godzilla. Those weren't the only big names attached to the project either. Rick Baker, best known for his award-winning effects on An American Werewolf in London, as well as stop-motion animators Jim Danforth and David W. Allen were all attached as well. On top of that, special effects companies ILM, who need no introduction, as well as DreamQuest Images, who would go on to create the visual effects in Disney's 2000 film Dinosaur, were also said to be possibly involved. Steve wanted the film to be in 3D and have a $30 million budget, and the budget is the primary reason it never saw the light of day. None of the studios wanted to back a $30 million film they believed would be catered towards kids. Luckily, unlike a lot of Godzilla's lost projects, a ton of the concept art has survived over the years, as well as the film's script, which was basically just a retelling of the typical Godzilla vs. Army scenario. There wouldn't be any other monster. Images of an unused animatronic, as well as a statue pictured here with William Stout, shows off what Godzilla would have looked like. Clearly his design was heavily inspired by a T-Rex, but at least he had his fucking atomic breath, so he already made this stupid thing look like a bitch. Steve would eventually give up in 1984, and with Godzilla 3D being tossed, Sony Pictures and TriStar bought the rights to Godzilla in 1994. Attached to write the screenplay were Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott, writing partners who had written Aladdin, and would go on to write Shrek and pretty much all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So clearly the writing side of things was in good hands. The first director to be at the head of the project was Speed director Jan de Bon. Again, a kick-ass director, if you ignore, Speed 2. However, de Bon wanted the film to have a $130 million budget, which at the time I think would have made it the most expensive movie of 1994, since True Lies cost $100 million. Anyway, Sony was like, nah, fuck that, so he left the project. Even though the Godzilla movie that ended up coming out cost around the same anyway. Really, it seems like that if the budget hadn't been a problem, this would have been the film we ended up with. It already had teaser artwork, as well as an actual teaser trailer.
First American production. Dynamic Hollywood filmmaking. Groundbreaking visual effects. All new American version Godzilla.
The script was done and would have pitted Godzilla against an actual monster called the Griffin, unlike his solo act that ultimately would come to be. The Griffin had sort of a Satan look to him. It was actually pretty cool. Stan Winston was even hired to create models of both the Griffin and Godzilla. Godzilla almost looks amazing, except for some reason he's got a duck face. I don't know what's up with that. If you want to read the script, I'd recommend it, but it would probably piss you off because it's far better than the 1998 film in every way, and actually stayed true to the spirit of Godzilla. There's even a fan-made graphic novel adaptation of that script if you don't feel like, reading it. Fast forward to 1998 when Godzilla finally hit theaters. While it was a box office hit, it was really disliked by fans and critics alike. But hey, that didn't stop TriStar from smacking the gift horse with a big-ass stick to fart out some more of that monster money. Early development for Godzilla 2 began in 1999, with a script draft being written by Tab Murphy, writer of Disney's Tarzan and Atlantis. The script would have followed Nick again as he basically fathered the surviving Babyzilla from the end of the first movie. In an act of, if you love something, set it free, he let the baby loose in the ocean and it finds its way to Australia. It ends up having a bunch of babies and does battle with a giant insect type of monster dubbed the Queen Bitch. Honestly, the script didn't sound too bad, but due to no one really giving a shit at the time about another American Godzilla, it never came to be. Though some of the ideas from that script would find their way into the Godzilla cartoon series, which was awesome, by the way. In 2003, Sony lost the rights to the Godzilla name, and it's been a long road, but now here we are. Legendary's Godzilla was a massive success, with not only 2 sequels, including a remake of Godzilla vs. King Kong, but also starting a giant monster cinematic universe. I honestly cannot wait to see what they do with the future Godzilla films, and I really couldn't be happier with how things ended up turning out. The American Godzilla from 1998 was a critical ass fucking, so the fact that Godzilla 2000 was even released in theaters in North America was just mind-blowing. As it stands now, Godzilla 2000 is a standalone movie, but it almost had a direct sequel, an American sequel. Michael Scheslinger, the writer of the American version of Godzilla 2000, came to Columbia Pictures with the concept for a new Godzilla movie called Godzilla Reborn that would have featured American Hollywood actors but would have used the suit from Godzilla 2000. Its budget was estimated to be $20 million, which is a far cry from the $130 million budget of 1998's Godzilla. You'd think that would have been enticing to Columbia Pictures, but the head of the studio didn't even bother to read the thing. Toho apparently liked the script and was on board too. In Reborn, Godzilla would have gone on a rampage through Hawaii, where he'd eventually meet up with a new kaiju called Miba, which was described as a fucking lava bat, which sounds awesome. But you know what really hurts? Apparently one of the actors considered for the movie was none other than Bruce Campbell. You're telling me I was deprived of a fucking Godzilla movie with Ash Williams because some dick at Columbia couldn't be damned to make a $20 million Godzilla movie? Fuck. After Godzilla's Revival, to scrap the taste of shit off her tongue after the 1998 film, Shusuke Kaneko, the brilliant director of the 90s Gamera films, which are without a doubt some of the best kaiju films ever created, came up with the concept to bring back one of Godzilla's older, obscurer rivals. Godzilla vs. Kamacuras would have seen the return of the giant mantis from Son of Godzilla, but with new CGI and special effects. However, this concept was quickly dropped after Shusuke found out Toho was already bringing back an old insect kaiju for Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. With that idea dead in the water, he started his next idea, dubbed Godzilla vs. M. M was an astronaut who starts to slowly transform into a mutated monster after he returns from space. This film would have shifted Godzilla into the villain, but sadly was never completed. Finally, his last idea, and the one that would eventually become one of the highest grossing and best films in the franchise, was Godzilla x Varan, Baragon, and Anguirus, giant monsters all out attack. When he submitted the idea to Toho, well, they decided that because Godzilla vs. Megaguirus did so shitty at the box office that they needed to make some changes. Ultimately, Varan and Anguirus were dropped in favor of King Ghidorah and Mothra, and boom, we ended up with the fantastic giant monsters all out attack. This is gonna be short and sweet. Godzilla vs. Gamera. You know that movie that fucking every single kaiju fan on the face of the earth wants? In 2002, it almost happened. Almost happened. Kadokawa, the company that owns the rights to Gamera, approached Toho, but Toho turned them down. The rumored reason is because Gamera was gonna win. Toho, you literally shit on a license to print money. Good job, guys. Do you remember when Yoshimitsu Banno was so sure his Godzilla vs. Hedorah would be successful that he immediately started a sequel, only to have Tomoyuki Tanaka ban him from ever making another Godzilla movie because it sucked so bad? Well, in 2007, Banno almost got his wish. Entitled Godzilla 3D to the Max, which is a fucking horrendous title, it would have actually been released in North America first, being released in IMAX theaters with a runtime of about 40 minutes. It was originally supposed to feature a monster that very closely resembled Hedorah, but with the name Deathlaw, and one of the original scripts for it would have had Godzilla facing Deathlaw on the site of the September 11th attacks. Who thought that would have been a good idea? It was just fucking dumb. I remember being super excited for this and was so incredibly pissed when it was cancelled. Sure, we got the 2014 Godzilla film, which was great, but I would have loved to have seen this. And there you have it. I have covered pretty much every single cancelled Godzilla movie. And if I still didn't include one, it just didn't have enough substantial information, at least not enough to warrant including it in this video.
We're away to